This is a storytelling channel, as you know. I sometimes deal with a historic event or real crime cases too, but even then I usually focus more on stories about the given subject matter than pure dry facts. I mean, usually stories are more fun to read, don't you think? Though, as a random stories floating around on the internet, there is no way I can prove if they are true or not. I usually think that is not the point, because I take them as an interesting take on Korean culture and psyche, as well as entertaining as they are. But for this week, I'm going to introduce you real events as real as reported by the mainstream media or the authority. Because sometimes dry facts can be just as or even more weird and spooky than any story. Let's see what you think of them. So, from a man saved by a turtle to a man who crucifixed himself. Here are 5 very weird but true incidents from Korea. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by a host. Anthony. On 17th August 2010, a car was found abandoned by the Andong Lake in Andong City, Gyeongsang Province. The car belonged to Mr. A, who was then 53 and was a vice principal of a local school. His necktie and shoes were found on the dock not far from where his car was parked. Search for him continued for a month, mainly focusing around the dock area. But they failed to find any trace of Mr. A, and the case went cold. On 17th May 2025, Mr. Baek Min-yu, 55, was working to install some over-the-water structure about 150 meters away from the dock. By mistake, he dropped the ladder in the lake. Being a seasoned scuba diver, he put on his gear, dived 30 meters down to retrieve the ladder. But shortly after, he happened to drop the same ladder once again, and Mr. Baek dived into the water once again too. It was then he saw a foot poking out of the mud at the bottom. He promptly alerted the police, and 2 days later, the body was retrieved. The body sustained some damage to his feet and head, but otherwise in a very good condition, including his shirt and trousers. The DNA test confirmed the body was Mr. A, the man that went missing 15 years ago. This could be just a lucky coincidence, if a bit uncanny, but there are several points that make it more than just an unusual coincidence. 1. Mr. A's body was found remarkably intact, considering he must have been under the water for 15 years, so much so he was almost recognizable. Now, as spooky as it sounds, it's not entirely impossible scientifically. That particular section of the lake, 30 meters under, is very calm and was found to keep a cool and stable temperature of 6 degrees Celsius. And the body was almost entirely buried under the lake bed, which had likely created the oxygen-deprived condition. The combined condition has likely softenified the body of Mr. A. Another unusual point is, Mr. Baek, who spotted the body first, was already involved with a case of missing Mr. A before. As an experienced diver, he was invited to join the search effort for Mr. A. Failing to find Mr. A left Mr. Baek frustrated, and in 2012 he found a voluntary-based civilian lifeguard organization. He and 30-odd volunteer divers have saved hundreds of lives or helped to find drowned victims over the years. But Mr. Baek would say the cold case of Mr. A remained in his mind all along. The final and the most bizarre element in this story is from what Mr. Baek further recounted.
I don't see myself very superstitious or anything usually, but That day, as I worked by the lakeside, I kept hearing a voice. Call it a hallucination. It said, "Hey, take me with you." I normally wouldn't have dived 30 meters down under the water to retrieve a ladder, which is not the most expensive thing in the world. But twice I did that day against any reason. I guess I wouldn't have done it were it not for what I heard.
Imagine a perfectly normal day at a typical residential district in the middle of Seoul. It's bright and sunny. You go out to get on with your day and run into this. A figure clad in all black cloak, top to bottom. The face mask with a long beak resembles half plague doctor and half child's drawing of a bird. Its thin, long arms extends well below its knees. The creature, nearly 2 meters tall, slowly staggers along, holding what looks like a stuffed doll or something. What would you do? What would you make of this bizarre creature in your own neighborhood? Pictures and rumors about this foreboding figure soon circulated around the local online community and earned the nickname of the Crow Man. The story was eventually picked up by an internet news media. On their 11th June 2018 article, The Insight passes on a local resident's account that this blackbird-looking figure plagued Gocheokdong Gurogu area for over 2 years. Many found it disturbing, but nobody knew who this was or what this weird presentation was for. People speculated that it might be a Halloween costume or a marketing gimmick for some film or game. But Halloween wasn't near, and a marketing project wouldn't have gone on for 2 years without revealing what it was marketing for. At least, this scary-looking crow man was a gentle creature, and even agreed to pose together should a curious passerby ask to take a photo together. For the reason, the local police confirmed no complaint was reported against this creature. When the news was picked up by bigger nationwide medias, the man behind the bird costume finally revealed himself. He was a student of an art college, and apparently the creepy cosplay was his art project. He revealed the early concept sketch and various other photos to prove that it was indeed his creation. The actual title of the art project was Halloween Alone, and he took it as a way of self-expression that had been hidden from his childhood under his repressive father. For his love of black, love of picking odd bits and pieces from the street, and the ambiguity between good and evil, he identified himself with a crow. The stuffed teddy bear the crow man carried around was the actual teddy bear from his childhood as a symbol of childlike innocence in him. Well, it turned out much more a wholesome story than anybody expected. But what would you have done if you ran into this crow man without knowing the backstory? The manager of a small beer brewery noticed the most recent batch of beer tasted a bit off, but the order date was due and he signed off the batch out to stores. Later that day, they entered to clean now empty brew tank and found the body of a staff who had gone missing since a week ago. This famous urban myth circulated in the US from the 60s. Over the years, the details sometimes switched to a chocolate factory, water tank, or canned soup factory, etc. But the main structure and the disgust factor remains the same. Now, the same urban myth exists and persists in Korea too. And, sad to say, it's actually based on a true case. The most widely circulated version of the story goes like this. Kang and Kim, both 18, were high school sweethearts. Kang was a son of the owner of a prominent local brewery, and Kim was a famous beauty that everyone knew. But the inner dynamic behind a perfect facade was not as perfect. Kim knew her power over men very well and grew up a gold digger. Having learned Kang was from a rich family, Kim tightened her grip on him, encouraged by Kim's parents, who even let the young couple stay at their place. But when Kang learned his girlfriend had a long history with many men, he got distressed. One night he invited Kim to the empty factory of his father's. He accused of and interrogated Kim about her past. Kim denied all of it, and even got naked in front of Kang as to prove her innocence. But facing Kang's unyielding coldness, she fainted. Panicking that Kim was dead, Kang disposed her body in the brew tank. The girl's body was discovered a full month later, and meanwhile, the batch from the tank was bottled and sold off to the market. This version of the story is unfortunately not entirely true. Characterizing the victim as a gold digger and promiscuous is the result of the vigorous smear campaign from the perpetrator's side. It was really not an uncommon tactic to brand the victim of a sexual assault or lost murder as a slut, as if the blame was on the victim. And in this case, the smear campaign worked and stuck largely thanks to the wealth and influence of the perpetrator's family. More recent investigation could capture the first-hand accounts from the people that knew both Kang and Kim. According to them, Kim, the victim, was just an ordinary girl, pretty but not a great beauty, and didn't have any boyfriends either. The fact is close that Kang pursued for Kim and took a grudge when Kim didn't return his interest. If that dynamic be true, it is most unlikely that Kim came to the brewery on her own will, nor how she was ultimately killed was so accidental. Unfortunately, the authority didn't perform autopsy, and will never fully understand what happened to her. The second untrue part in the most circulated version is its most morbid part, that the unsuspecting public drank the dead girl's juice. First, it is clearly untrue that the body stayed in the tank for a month. The murder took place on 8th April 1978, and the report on Kang's arrest was on 26th of the same month. We do not have a record of when exactly the dead body was discovered, but it certainly didn't stay there for a month. Also, the brew tank had a large window to it because it belonged to the factory lab rather than normal production line. All in all, the body must have been spotted quite soon, and highly unlikely that the spirit from the same tank was unwittingly signed off to the market. Unfortunately, there's no satisfying ending to this sad story. Kang, the perpetrator, was sentenced only for 3-year imprisonment. One newspaper pursued further investigation about the case, but the Kang family countered it by buying off all the copies of the weekly magazine containing the investigation. Long before the time of internet, the incident was largely forgotten among public or reduced to a warped urban myth. The brewery business sustained some damage, but carried on until it was sold off to a bigger company in 1985. Kang was released in 1981 after serving the full sentence. We do not know what happened to him afterwards, but considering his family wealth was unaffected, we can speculate he must have led a comfortable enough life. "5 p.m., 23rd August, 1969. About 182 kilometers away from the coast of Nicaragua. The captain of the boat, the Citadel, was alerted by his staffs about an object on the sea. It looked like a giant black rock floating on the surface. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a sea turtle. Rather unusual to run into a turtle that far off the coast, but nothing unheard of either. But the turtle wasn't alone. There was a man hanging onto its shell. 13 hours prior, Mr. Kim Jong-nam, a 27-year-old seaman, couldn't sleep due to a bad headache. He got up and walked out the deck to get some air, but he slipped and fell onto the sea. It was in the middle of the night and nobody else was on the deck. For the following few hours, Kim managed to stay afloat, but soon he got so exhausted that he couldn't move his limbs anymore. It was then he saw something dark approaching him. He first thought it'd be a shark. That part of the water was famously shark-infested. But it turned out to be a big sea turtle. Kim hung onto it. He couldn't swim anymore and let himself carried by the turtle for the next few hours until the Citadel spotted the turtle and him. By the time Kim returned to Korea and reunited with his family, the amusing news about a man rescued by a turtle had already run around the world. At an interview from the time, Dr. Gordon, an American marine biologist, commented that sea turtles are normally very sensitive creatures. If it feels attacked, it would usually dive into the sea to escape, and it was indeed out of ordinary that this particular turtle swam on the surface with a Kim tagging on its back. In a later interview in 2017 with a Korean media, Kim Jong-nam said,
"My mother used to pray to the god of the sea every day. And I also hear a long time ago, when my father worked as a seaman on a fishing boat, he once found a turtle tangled up in his fishing net. He offered some alcohol to the turtle. He thought it'd boost its energy and let free back in the sea. According to my father, the turtle looked back at him many times as it swam away. Call it a superstition, but who knows?"
Mr. Kim is now retired and would still advise young fishers and seamen to treat sea creatures with respect, and still does not forget to make an offer to the god of the sea on every New Year's Day. On 1st May 2011, 3 beekeepers were venturing around the Tundok Mountain in Mungyang City, Gyeongsang Province, to find an appropriate location for their beehives. They came across the barren landscape of a retired quarry, and there was a totally unexpected scene. Somebody erected a wooden cross, and there was hanging a man, dead. Clearly somebody intended to recreate the conventional imagery of the crucifix. The man was naked save for his white briefs. On his head was a crown of thorns. His hands and feet were nailed to the cross. On his right side was a cut wound too, completing the 5 spots of stigmata. On each side of the main cross were 2 smaller crosses as to symbolize the 2 thieves crucifixed with Jesus. Even the barren surrounding of the old quarry resembled Golgotha as depicted in various religious paintings. Apart from them, there were also a mirror and a clock facing the dead man. The dead man was identified as Kim, then 57, who worked as a local cab driver. The autopsy determined he might have been dead more than a week prior, shortly before the Easter. The direct cause of death was by asphyxiation by the rope that tied his neck to the cross. The search around the quarry found a tent where Kim seemed to have prepared his crucifix, a note on which Jesus of Nazareth, the King of Jews, written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, as well as a hand drill that seemed to have used to make hole through his hands, and a little dagger that would have used to create a wound on his right side. Further search at his home found plans to build crosses and orthopedics textbooks. So far, every evidence showed that it was very carefully and willfully planned, and Kim himself was definitely involved. Problem was, there was no clear motive. Kim was not an obvious fanatic Christian. There is a record he worked as a pastor some 30 years prior, but Kim's younger brother denied he was a typical churchgoer. At the same time, there's a trace that he was active on an online Christian community, and also a pastor claimed to have heard Kim saying, "Am I not Jesus himself?" 2 years prior to his death. The bigger problem was if Kim could really crucifix himself all by himself, or if there was one or more collaborators in the process. In the end, the authority concluded that Kim performed this gruesome task all by himself. It was controversial because it was against common sense, but apparently they didn't find any evidence that somebody else was involved. The police recreated the steps Kim might have taken. First, Kim erected 3 crosses. Nails were already put at each wings of the main cross, as well as bandaged to support his arms later. Put the big mirror in front of the main cross and a small mirror to the smaller cross on the right side. Then he put a crown of thorns on his head, stepped on the cross, nailed his right foot first and then the left, and threw away the hammer used. He then tied his waist and neck to the cross, fixing himself to it. Next, checking the right angle using the mirror put on the small cross to his right, he created a cut to his right side, then threw away the dagger used. Then, using a hand drill, he punctured a hole to his both hands. The drill was thrown out once the job was done. Finally, he hung his hands to the nails pre-installed to each wings of the cross. As he became gradually unconscious from losing too much blood, his body naturally slouched forward, and the rope tied around his neck strangulated him to death, in effect. I think one should agree the steps given by the authority is logical enough. But could a person really go through the self-mutilation so meticulously despite all the pain? The autopsy showed no trace of painkiller, psychedelics, or anesthesia, and the wounds to this body showed no sign of hesitation either. What kind of mindset should make a person perform such a task step by step? Fans of Morbid still discuss and speculate about this case, but unless some new evidence surfaces, it will remain as the strangest case of suicide. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. It was slightly different kind of episode. Frankly, I enjoy the creative freedom of the usual stories I deal with, but I didn't want to pass on these instances when the real events are weirder than any old story. Do let me know if you enjoyed it. I may introduce more of weird but true stories occasionally in the future. If you enjoyed my work, please give it a big thumbs up in a comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. If you'd support me more directly, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account. The link's in the description, or there's also a super thanks option here on YouTube for a small donation. Thank you. Until the next, stay safe and take care.